Every morning, thousands of people walked through the towering glass entrance of Carter Global Holdings believing success could be recognized instantly. They believed it was reflected in tailored suits, reserved parking spaces, polished offices overlooking the city skyline, and titles printed in bold letters beneath expensive names. They believed power announced itself before anyone spoke a single word. But on one ordinary Monday morning, inside one of America's most respected corporations, a single moment quietly challenged everything they thought they understood about leadership, respect, and human character. A young security guard stood at the entrance holding the door open for employees rushing into another busy workday. Most people never looked at his face. Some nodded without slowing down. Others walked past as though he were part of the building itself. Then, without warning, a sharply dressed executive named Vanessa Collins stopped directly in front of him, extended her empty coffee cup with complete indifference, and said, "You're paid to stand there. Act like it." Conversations continued around them as if nothing unusual had happened. The young guard calmly accepted the cup, bent down to pick up the lid that had fallen onto the polished marble floor, looked back at Vanessa with a warm smile, and quietly replied, "I hope you have a wonderful morning." She smirked before disappearing into the crowd of executives, convinced she had just put an insignificant employee in his place. What she didn't know was that hundreds of security cameras had silently captured the exchange, and someone watching from outside the building had seen every second of it. Parked across the street, hidden behind the tinted windows of a black SUV, sat Margaret Carter, the legendary founder and chief executive officer of Carter Global Holdings. Her face revealed no anger, no disappointment, and no satisfaction. She simply continued watching as employee after employee hurried through the entrance without noticing the young man standing there. After several quiet moments, she glanced toward the building and softly whispered, "Just one more week." Then she closed the notebook resting on her lap, one already filled with observations gathered over the previous 5 months. Every act of kindness had been recorded. Every careless insult had been written down. Every decision made when people believed nobody important was watching had become part of an experiment unlike anything the company had ever attempted. The people walking into Carter Global believed they were being evaluated by quarterly reports, sales numbers, and performance reviews. They had no idea that the most important evaluation of their careers had been taking place every single morning in the lobby, where their treatment of one quiet security guard revealed more about their character than any performance appraisal ever could. Only days later, the atmosphere inside Carter Global changed completely. The company's annual executive board meeting brought together department heads, senior managers, board members, and investors from across the country. Rumors spread through the conference room as everyone waited for Margaret Carter to announce a decision that would shape the company's future for decades. The room fell silent when the boardroom doors slowly opened. Instead of another executive entering with a stack of reports, the same young security guard who had greeted employees every morning calmly stepped inside, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. His posture was confident. His expression remained humble. Every conversation stopped instantly. One executive accidentally dropped a coffee mug onto the conference table. Another stared in complete disbelief. Vanessa Collins felt the color disappear from her face as memories of every dismissive comment she had made came rushing back all at once. Nobody understood why the security guard had entered a meeting reserved for the most powerful people in the company. Then Margaret Carter stood, looked around the room, and smiled. At that moment, every assumption people had made about power, success, and status began to collapse, leaving behind one question that nobody in the room, or watching this story today, could ignore. Who was Ethan Carter, and why had one of America's wealthiest families allowed him to spend 6 months living as an ordinary security guard while the entire company unknowingly revealed its true character? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The silence inside the boardroom lasted only a few seconds, but for the people sitting around that polished conference table, it felt much longer. Every executive in the room was trying to answer the same question without saying it out loud. How could the quiet security guard who had spent months opening doors, greeting visitors, carrying packages, and patiently helping employees find their offices suddenly walk into one of the most restricted meetings in the company as though he belonged there? Some searched their memories, wondering if they had overlooked something obvious. Others replayed every interaction they had ever had with him, hoping they hadn't made a mistake they would soon regret. Vanessa Collins didn't need to search her memory. She remembered everything. Every careless remark, every dismissive glance. Every morning, she had handed Ethan Carter her coffee cup without so much as acknowledging his name. For the first time since joining Carter Global Holdings, confidence disappeared from her face, replaced by a quiet uncertainty she had never experienced before. Margaret Carter remained standing at the head of the conference table, carefully observing every expression in the room before saying another word. She had spent decades building one of America's most admired companies, but the success of Carter Global had never been measured only by revenue or market value. She believed the true strength of any organization could only be measured by the character of the people trusted to lead it. Financial reports could reveal profits. Performance reviews could measure productivity. Quarterly earnings could satisfy investors. None of those things could answer a much more important question. What kind of people were making decisions when nobody believed they were being watched? That single question had stayed with Margaret for years, eventually leading her to create an experiment that would challenge not only her executives, but her own son as well. The mystery surrounding Ethan Carter was far greater than simply discovering his family name. Anyone could inherit wealth. Anyone could be introduced as the future leader of a successful company. But why would the only heir to a multi-billion-dollar business voluntarily exchange tailored suits for a security uniform, stand for hours at the front entrance, and quietly accept disrespect from people who believed he had no influence whatsoever? Why would someone raised with every privilege willingly choose a position where most employees barely noticed his presence? Even more puzzling was Margaret Carter's role in the entire experience. Why did she spend months sitting inside a black SUV across the street, silently observing interactions that appeared ordinary to everyone else? She possessed the authority to walk into the building whenever she pleased, yet she deliberately remained outside, watching events unfold without interference. It was as though she already knew something the rest of the company had yet to discover. Then there was Vanessa Collins. On paper, she represented everything Carter Global valued. She consistently exceeded sales targets, impressed major clients, and earned the admiration of senior leadership through confidence and determination. Yet every encounter she had with Ethan revealed a completely different side of her personality. She rarely addressed him by name. She spoke to him as though respect had to be earned through job titles rather than humanity. To everyone else, her behavior seemed insignificant, just another executive in a hurry during a demanding workday. But small moments often reveal the biggest truths. Every careless decision Vanessa made was quietly becoming part of a much larger story, one she never imagined would eventually determine her own future within the company. At the same time, somewhere inside Carter Global's headquarters, another employee was making choices that attracted no attention at all. Those choices were simple, almost invisible to everyone around her. A warm greeting before the workday began. A genuine thank you. A willingness to treat every person with equal respect regardless of position. Ethan noticed those moments immediately, even if nobody else did. He had no idea that one ordinary employee would soon earn his complete trust, not through impressive presentations or ambitious speeches, but through quiet acts of kindness that asked for nothing in return. Long before promotions were announced, long before secrets reached the boardroom, and long before the truth about Ethan Carter became impossible to hide, the future of Carter Global Holdings was already being shaped by decisions so small that most people never even realized they mattered. Every unanswered question pointed toward the same place. Why had Margaret Carter designed such an extraordinary test? What hidden problems had Ethan discovered while standing at the front entrance every single day? Which employees revealed remarkable integrity, and which quietly exposed the weaknesses threatening the company's future? Most importantly, what happened during those 6 months that caused experienced executives to fall completely silent when the security guard walked into the boardroom wearing a tailored suit? Those answers would not be found in financial statements or executive offices. They began on the day one of America's most respected CEOs asked her own son to give up everything people associated with success and start over from the very bottom. To understand why that boardroom fell silent, we have to go back 6 months. The keys to his imported sports car remained locked inside the garage beneath his luxury penthouse overlooking Manhattan. The executive office that had been prepared for him sat untouched, its polished desk collecting dust, while senior managers wondered why the future leader of Carter Global Holdings had suddenly become unavailable. Designer suits were carefully packed away, expensive watches disappeared into a safe, and the lifestyle that had followed him since childhood quietly came to an end. There were no chauffeurs waiting outside his building, no executive assistants organizing his schedule, and no invitations to exclusive business dinners. For the first time in his life, Ethan would experience a world where his family name opened no doors because nobody would even know it existed. Margaret Carter insisted that if the experiment was going to reveal the truth about the company, it had to be completely authentic. There could be no special treatment, no hidden privileges, and absolutely no safety net waiting to rescue him when the experience became uncomfortable. Instead of the spacious penthouse apartment he had called home for years, Ethan rented a modest one-bedroom apartment several miles away from Carter Global's headquarters. The apartment was clean but simple, with aging wooden floors, a small kitchen barely large enough for one person, and furniture that had clearly seen better days. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with ordinary people leaving early for work and returning home late each evening. Nobody recognized him. Nobody greeted him as the future executive of a billion-dollar corporation. To his neighbors, he was simply another young man beginning a new job. The change was greater than Ethan had expected. For years, nearly every decision in his life had been made with convenience in mind. Now he prepared his own meals, washed his own uniforms, managed every expense carefully, and experienced the daily routines millions of hard-working Americans considered completely normal. Each evening, he found himself reflecting on how easily comfort could create distance from the realities most people faced every day. Margaret had never intended to punish him. She wanted him to understand that leadership began long before anyone entered a boardroom. The transformation became complete on the first Monday morning. Long before sunrise painted the skyline with the first hints of daylight, Ethan stood quietly inside his apartment, fastening the final button on a neatly pressed security uniform. The dark blue fabric felt unfamiliar. The polished shoes replacing his expensive Italian leather footwear were practical rather than fashionable. A simple identification badge rested against his chest, displaying only his first name and his position. Looking into the mirror, he hardly recognized the person staring back at him. There was nothing about his appearance suggesting wealth, influence, or executive authority. That realization brought a strange mixture of uncertainty and determination. He picked up a packed lunch he had prepared the night before, locked the apartment door behind him, and drove an older sedan to Carter Global Holdings. As he arrived, the streets remained almost empty, the city still waking up around him. Security staff preparing for the morning shift welcomed him politely, explained his responsibilities, and treated him exactly as they would any newly hired employee. It was the first time in his life Ethan had entered the headquarters through the employee service entrance instead of the executive parking garage. As the morning progressed, the building slowly filled with hundreds of employees arriving for another busy workday. Ethan stood beside the revolving doors greeting everyone with the same warm smile, holding the entrance open, answering questions from visitors, directing deliveries, and wishing people a pleasant morning. Most employees walked past without making eye contact. Some nodded politely before continuing toward the elevators. Others remained completely focused on their phones, never realizing the security guard speaking to them was the very person many believed would someday lead the company. The experience surprised Ethan more than he expected. Without the Carter name attached to him, he had become almost invisible. People who would have eagerly welcomed him into their offices only days earlier now passed within a few feet of him without a second glance. For the first time in his life, nobody knew his name, his background, or the future everyone had once predicted for him. He wasn't the billionaire's son. He wasn't the future CEO. He was simply another security guard standing quietly at the front entrance, watching the company reveal itself one ordinary interaction at a time. Then, just as the busiest part of the morning rush began, the revolving doors opened once again, and a confident woman dressed in an impeccably tailored business suit stepped through the entrance carrying a designer handbag in one hand and a half-finished cup of coffee in the other. Employees immediately greeted her with admiration as she made her way across the lobby. Ethan glanced at the employee badge clipped neatly to her jacket. The name read Vanessa Collins. Within the next few moments, their paths would cross for the very first time, setting into motion a chain of events neither of them could possibly imagine, and transforming what appeared to be an ordinary Monday morning into the beginning of the most important lesson Carter Global Holdings would ever learn. The days quickly settled into a routine, but for Ethan Carter, every sunrise brought a new lesson that no classroom, executive seminar, or board meeting could have taught him. He arrived before the first employees entered the building, checked every entrance, greeted delivery drivers, answered visitors' questions, and stood patiently at his assigned post as the lobby slowly filled with hundreds of people beginning another demanding workday. What surprised him most wasn't the workload. It was how quickly people stopped seeing him altogether. During his years preparing to become the future leader of Carter Global Holdings, almost every conversation had begun with a handshake, a smile, or an introduction. Now, standing in the same building wearing a different uniform, he had become nearly invisible. Employees brushed past him without making eye contact. Some spoke over him as though he weren't standing there. Others stretched out their hands expecting him to carry packages, hold elevator doors, or solve problems that had nothing to do with security. It wasn't because they were intentionally cruel. Many simply never considered that the person standing quietly beside the entrance might deserve the same respect they offered executives on the top floor. Every unnoticed moment became another reminder that titles often influence behavior more than character did. As the weeks passed, Ethan began noticing something even more revealing. Whenever something went wrong, the nearest person in a uniform often became the easiest target. If a delivery arrived late, someone blamed security. If a visitor couldn't find the correct office, frustration landed on Ethan before anyone checked the reception desk. One afternoon, a conference room reservation had been entered incorrectly by an administrative assistant, causing an important client meeting to be delayed by nearly 20 minutes. Although Ethan had absolutely nothing to do with scheduling, an irritated department manager marched across the lobby and demanded to know why security had failed to direct the visitors properly. Ethan calmly apologized for the inconvenience, helped escort the guests to the correct floor, and returned to his post without defending himself. Moments like that happened almost every day. Instead of becoming angry, he quietly observed how quickly people searched for someone with the least authority whenever mistakes needed someone to blame. It was an uncomfortable truth, but it taught him more about leadership than any financial report ever had. No one demonstrated that reality more consistently than Vanessa Collins. At first, Ethan believed her behavior on that first Monday morning might simply have been the result of stress. Carter Global was a demanding company, and senior executives often carried enormous responsibilities. But as the days turned into weeks, he realized her attitude wasn't temporary. Every morning she expected Ethan to hold the lobby doors open before she reached them, even when several other employees were standing nearby. If she finished her coffee before reaching the elevator, she casually handed him the empty cup without asking. She rarely acknowledged his greeting and almost never used his name, despite seeing the identification badge on his uniform every day. When important clients visited the building, she spoke to Ethan only to issue instructions, never to thank him afterward. Several younger employees quietly followed her example, assuming that if a respected executive treated the security guard as though he were invisible, they could do the same. Ethan never argued, never corrected anyone, and never allowed frustration to appear on his face. Instead, he remembered every interaction, not because he wanted revenge, but because he was beginning to understand exactly what Margaret Carter had hoped he would discover. Fortunately, not everyone inside Carter Global viewed people through the same lens. Nearly every morning, just before the busiest rush of employees entered the building, a project coordinator named Naomi Parker walked through the revolving doors carrying a canvas tote bag, a notebook tucked beneath one arm, and the same genuine smile she offered everyone she met. Unlike most people, Naomi never hurried past the security desk without saying good morning. She greeted Ethan by name from his very first week, thanked him whenever he helped visitors, and often paused for a brief conversation before taking the elevator upstairs. At first, Ethan assumed she was simply polite by nature. Over time, He realized her kindness wasn't something she turned on when people were watching. She treated the receptionists, custodial staff, interns, executives, and maintenance crews with exactly the same warmth. To Naomi, respect wasn't connected to salary or position. It was simply the right way to treat another person. One afternoon, several weeks into the experiment, Naomi noticed something no one else seemed to recognize. As employees gathered in the cafeteria, Ethan remained at the security desk with only a bottle of water beside him. She had seen the same pattern for several days and finally decided to ask. Ethan smiled politely and explained that he planned to eat later after the lunchtime rush had ended. Naomi looked at him for a moment before quietly opening the lunch container she had brought from home. Without making a scene or expecting gratitude, she placed half of her sandwich and a piece of fruit on a napkin and slid them across the desk toward him. "Nobody does their best work on an empty stomach," she said with a gentle smile. Ethan hesitated before accepting, genuinely moved by such a simple gesture. During the weeks that followed, those brief lunch conversations became one of the few parts of each day he genuinely looked forward to. They rarely discussed business. Instead, they spoke about family, favorite books, childhood memories, and the small experiences that shaped who people became long before their careers defined them. Without realizing it, Naomi was earning something far more valuable than admiration. She was earning Ethan's complete trust through ordinary acts of kindness that required no audience and expected nothing in return. As Ethan continued quietly observing life inside Carter Global Holdings, he discovered that the most important conversations often happened when people believed no one of significance was listening. Late one evening, after most employees had gone home, he was assigned to monitor a hallway outside one of the executive conference rooms while a meeting continued behind closed doors. The discussion inside sounded routine at first, but then the voices became lower, more serious, and one sentence immediately caught Ethan's attention. It was a conversation the executives would never have allowed to take place if they had remembered that a security guard was standing only a few feet outside the door. What Ethan heard next would force him to question everything he thought he understood about the company his mother had spent a lifetime building. The weeks that followed transformed the experiment into something far greater than either Ethan Carter or Margaret Carter had originally imagined. What had begun as a simple lesson about humility gradually became an unfiltered look inside the true culture of Carter Global Holdings. Ethan was no longer focused only on how people treated him because of the uniform he wore. He had started noticing patterns that repeated themselves across departments, patterns invisible to executives who spent most of their time in private offices and board meetings. Standing in the lobby, walking the hallways, assisting employees, and occasionally working late shifts allowed him to witness conversations that usually disappeared before reaching senior leadership. He realized that every company had policies printed in employee handbooks, but the real culture of an organization was revealed through everyday decisions made when supervisors were nowhere in sight. Those decisions told stories that financial reports could never capture, and the longer Ethan remained unnoticed, the clearer those stories became. One afternoon, Ethan watched a young financial analyst named David finish an impressive presentation after spending nearly 3 weeks preparing detailed research for an important client proposal. Ethan had often seen David arriving before sunrise and leaving long after sunset, carrying stacks of reports between departments while quietly refining every detail. Later that afternoon, as executives gathered to congratulate the team, Ethan happened to be standing near the conference room entrance holding the door open. He listened as a department manager confidently presented David's work as though it had been entirely his own idea. The room erupted in applause, handshakes followed, and praise filled the meeting. David forced a polite smile, accepted a brief nod of appreciation, and returned to his desk without correcting anyone. The manager accepted every compliment with confidence, never once mentioning the employee whose dedication had made the success possible. Ethan noticed the disappointment on David's face as everyone walked away. It lasted only a few seconds before he quietly returned to work, but those few seconds revealed something Ethan would never forget. Recognition wasn't always earned by the people who deserved it most. As the days passed, Ethan discovered that silence had become surprisingly common throughout Carter Global Holdings. Employees often discussed concerns privately in break rooms, elevators, and empty hallways, But those same concerns almost never reached formal meetings. Junior staff hesitated before questioning senior managers, even when they recognized obvious mistakes. Creative ideas disappeared because people feared being dismissed or misunderstood. Ethan overheard talented employees deciding it was safer to remain quiet than risk challenging someone with a more impressive title. The atmosphere wasn't openly hostile, yet an invisible barrier had slowly developed between leadership and the people responsible for carrying out its decisions. Nobody wanted to appear difficult. Nobody wanted to jeopardize future promotions. Gradually, honesty gave way to caution, and caution slowly became silence. Ethan began realizing that the greatest danger facing Carter Global wasn't poor financial performance. It was the possibility that gifted employees no longer believed their voices mattered. The deeper Ethan looked, the more examples appeared. Promotions occasionally seemed influenced more by personal alliances than consistent performance. Certain employees received opportunities because they maintained close relationships with influential executives, while others with stronger qualifications remained overlooked year after year. Talented individuals quietly accepted transfers, resigned without explanation, or settled into roles far beneath their potential simply because they believed hard work alone would never be enough to move forward. Office politics had quietly begun replacing the culture of fairness Margaret Carter had spent decades building. Meetings often ended with polite smiles, but once the conference room doors closed, whispered conversations revealed frustration, disappointment, and growing distrust. Ethan found himself asking the same question over and over. How had these problems developed inside a company founded on integrity without anyone at the highest level realizing how serious they had become? Each Friday evening, after completing another demanding week, Ethan returned to his modest apartment and prepared a detailed report for Margaret Carter. Every observation remained anonymous. No accusations were exaggerated. No personal opinions were added. Ethan simply described what he had witnessed, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. He wrote about employees who quietly supported one another without seeking recognition. He documented examples of disrespect that revealed deeper cultural problems. He highlighted overlooked talent, unnecessary bureaucracy, acts of generosity, and moments that demonstrated both the best and worst qualities within the organization. The reports arrived at Margaret's private office every Monday morning through a secure process known only to the two of them. She read every page carefully, making handwritten notes in the margins before locking each report inside a confidential file. Strangely, she never intervened. She never called emergency meetings, questioned department heads, or attempted to correct the behavior Ethan described. To anyone watching from the outside, it appeared as though nothing was happening at all. Margaret understood something Ethan was only beginning to appreciate. If she acted too early, employees would simply change their behavior because they knew someone was watching. The experiment would lose its greatest value. She needed to see who people truly were before deciding how to lead them into the future. It required patience that few executives possessed. Every week, the reports became more revealing, and every week Margaret resisted the temptation to interfere. She knew the final picture was still incomplete. The company was gradually exposing truths that could never have been uncovered through traditional audits or employee surveys. Still, even Margaret had begun to wonder whether the experiment was uncovering problems much larger than she had expected. That concern became impossible to ignore late one evening when Michael Reynolds, the longtime chairman of the board and Margaret Carter's most trusted advisor, requested a private meeting after reviewing several confidential observations. Closing the office door behind him, Michael lowered his voice before speaking. "Margaret," he said carefully, "I supported this experiment because I believed it would reveal the character of our future leaders. But I'm beginning to think it may reveal something much bigger. If Ethan keeps finding what he's finding, we may discover that the company itself has changed in ways neither of us ever imagined." The atmosphere inside Carter Global Holdings changed almost without anyone noticing. The smiles in the hallways remained. Meetings continued as scheduled. Quarterly goals were discussed with the same confidence as always. Yet beneath the polished professionalism, subtle divisions had begun to form. Ethan Carter recognized the change long before most employees did because his position placed him where conversations naturally unfolded. Standing near elevators, greeting visitors outside conference rooms, and walking the corridors during evening patrols allowed him to witness the quiet moments that rarely appeared in official reports. One afternoon, he noticed Naomi Parker leaving a strategy meeting much earlier than expected. Her expression remained composed, but there was a disappointment in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A few minutes later, Ethan overheard two employees whispering that Naomi's invitation had been withdrawn at the last minute because senior leadership wanted different voices in the room. The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, yet something about the timing felt strangely deliberate. It was the first sign that someone was quietly working to push Naomi away from opportunities she had earned. Over the following weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Naomi, once recognized as one of the company's most dependable project coordinators, suddenly found herself excluded from discussions she had helped prepare. Reports she had spent days organizing were presented by other employees. Projects she had initiated were reassigned without clear explanation. Invitations to planning sessions disappeared from her calendar only hours before meetings began. Whenever she politely asked whether there had been a mistake, the answers were always courteous but vague. Plans changed. Leadership wanted a smaller group. "We'll involve you next time." At first, Naomi accepted those explanations, believing they were simply part of the demands of corporate life. But as the weeks passed, even she began noticing that the changes always seemed to benefit the same person. Vanessa Collins. Vanessa had become increasingly influential within Carter Global Holdings, and she understood that reputation often mattered as much as performance. While she remained friendly during formal meetings, her actions outside those meetings told a different story. Ethan watched as she quietly questioned Naomi's decisions in conversations with senior managers, always disguising criticism as concern. She hinted that Naomi lacked confidence when handling important clients. She suggested that Naomi struggled under pressure despite evidence, showing exactly the opposite. None of the comments were dramatic enough to attract immediate attention, yet together they slowly reshaped the way others perceived Naomi. Before long, rumors began circulating through the office. Some employees whispered that Naomi was no longer considered leadership material. Others claimed she had lost the confidence of upper management. Nobody seemed able to explain where those stories had originated, but they spread with surprising speed, carried from department to department until speculation began replacing facts. Ethan listened in silence as those conversations unfolded around him. Every instinct urged him to step forward and defend Naomi. He knew the truth. He had witnessed her dedication, her professionalism, and the quiet kindness she showed every employee regardless of position. He also knew that many of the rumors were built on half-truths and carefully planted doubts rather than reality. More than once he found himself taking a step toward a conversation, ready to correct what he had just heard. Each time he stopped himself, Margaret Carter's instructions echoed in his mind with painful clarity. No one could discover who he really was. The moment he revealed his identity, the 6-month experiment would end immediately. Everything they had sacrificed to uncover the company's true culture would be lost. Remaining silent became one of the hardest responsibilities he had ever carried. Watching someone who had treated him with genuine respect become the target of unfair criticism tested his patience far more than any insult directed toward himself. The emotional weight grew heavier with every passing day. Naomi never complained publicly. She continued arriving early, completing every assignment with the same care she had always shown, and treating everyone around her with quiet dignity despite the growing isolation. Ethan admired her resilience. Yet it became increasingly difficult to watch opportunities disappear from someone who had earned them through honesty and hard work. Some evenings, after returning to his modest apartment, he found himself staring at the confidential reports he prepared for Margaret Carter, wondering whether simply documenting the truth was enough. He questioned whether leadership sometimes demanded immediate action instead of careful observation. Then he remembered why the experiment existed in the first place. Margaret wasn't trying to catch one dishonest executive. She was trying to understand whether the culture of Carter Global Holdings rewarded integrity or allowed ambition to overshadow it. Every difficult moment Ethan witnessed brought them closer to that answer, even if remaining silent came at a personal cost. Just when the tension inside the company seemed ready to reach a breaking point, an announcement arrived that instantly changed the mood throughout every department. An email marked executive priority appeared in every employee's inbox early Monday morning. Conversations stopped as people opened the message. Managers stepped out of offices. Department heads began reorganizing schedules. The notice was brief but significant. Margaret Carter had officially scheduled the annual board meeting, the most important gathering in the company's calendar, where major leadership decisions, executive promotions, and the future direction of Carter Global Holdings would be announced. No one outside Margaret, Michael Reynolds, and Ethan Carter knew that this meeting had another purpose entirely. Within a matter of days, the experiment that had quietly unfolded for 6 months would finally come to an end, and the truth waiting behind the boardroom doors would change lives forever. The morning of the annual board meeting arrived with an unusual sense of anticipation that seemed to spread throughout every floor of Carter Global Holdings. Long before sunrise, employees hurried through the revolving doors carrying presentation folders, financial reports, and laptops filled with projections that would help determine the company's direction for the coming year. Executive assistants moved quickly between offices making last-minute preparations, while department heads reviewed speeches they had practiced for weeks. Inside the executive boardroom, fresh coffee had been arranged neatly along one side of the polished conference table. Every leather chair had been carefully positioned, and a large display screen quietly cycled through the company's achievements from the previous year. Investors, board members, and senior executives gradually took their seats, exchanging confident smiles while speculating about promotions, restructuring plans, and the announcement everyone believed Margaret Carter would eventually make regarding the future leadership of Carter Global Holdings. The atmosphere was formal, optimistic, and filled with quiet confidence. To everyone present, it appeared to be another important corporate meeting. None of them realized they were about to witness the conclusion of an experiment that had been unfolding in front of them every single day for 6 months. Outside the boardroom, something else immediately caught people's attention. The familiar security guard who normally greeted everyone each morning was nowhere to be seen. Several employees glanced toward the lobby, expecting Ethan Carter to be standing beside the entrance with his usual calm smile, politely welcoming visitors as he had done every workday since joining the company. Instead, another security officer had taken his place. A few employees casually wondered whether Ethan had been assigned to another shift. Others assumed he had taken the day off. Vanessa Collins noticed his absence as she walked through the lobby carrying her morning coffee. For reasons she couldn't explain, she briefly paused and looked toward the security desk before continuing toward the executive elevator. It felt unusual not seeing the young man she had become accustomed to ordering around almost every morning. She dismissed the thought almost immediately, convincing herself that the company meeting deserved her full attention. Ethan Carter was, in her mind, simply a security guard. His absence could not possibly have anything to do with the most important meeting of the year. Inside the boardroom, Michael Reynolds quietly welcomed everyone before inviting Margaret Carter to begin the meeting. As always, Margaret remained composed, her calm presence immediately commanding the room without the need to raise her voice. She thanked the board members for their years of service, acknowledged the dedication shown by employees across the organization, and spoke briefly about Carter Global's remarkable growth. Then, unexpectedly, she stopped speaking. Looking slowly around the room, she folded her notes and placed them carefully on the table. The silence that followed felt different from the ordinary pauses people expected during formal presentations. Executives exchanged puzzled glances. Several investors looked toward Michael Reynolds, wondering whether something had changed in the agenda. Margaret simply smiled, turned her eyes toward the closed boardroom doors, and quietly said, "Before we discuss the future of this company, there is someone I would like all of you to meet." Every eye in the room shifted toward the entrance. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then the boardroom doors slowly opened. The room became so quiet that even the soft sound of polished shoes crossing the hardwood floor echoed against the walls. The man who entered looked familiar, yet somehow completely different. Gone was the neatly pressed security uniform everyone had come to associate with the quiet young employee stationed in the lobby. In its place was a perfectly tailored navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a deep blue tie that reflected understated confidence rather than wealth. Ethan Carter walked calmly toward the center of the room with the same composed smile he had worn every morning while holding open the lobby doors. He neither hurried nor hesitated. His posture remained humble, but there was a quiet assurance in every step. One board member slowly lowered his reading glasses in disbelief. Another executive accidentally released the coffee mug in his hand, sending it tumbling onto the conference table with a sharp sound that broke the silence before the room fell completely quiet once again. No one spoke. No one moved. Every person present was trying to understand how the company's security guard had just walked into a meeting reserved for the most powerful people in Carter Global Holdings. Vanessa Collins felt her heartbeat quicken as memories began flooding back with painful clarity. She remembered the first morning she had handed Ethan her empty coffee cup without even looking at him. She remembered every dismissive order, every impatient remark, every time she had expected him to hold doors, carry packages, or simply disappear into the background because his uniform convinced her he held no importance. She remembered never asking his name because she believed it didn't matter. Looking at the man standing confidently before the board, she suddenly realized that every assumption she had made over the previous 6 months had been completely wrong. For the first time in her successful career, Vanessa couldn't find the confidence to meet someone else's eyes. The certainty that had defined her reputation disappeared in an instant, replaced by the overwhelming realization that the quiet security guard she had repeatedly humiliated had never forgotten a single interaction. Margaret Carter allowed the silence to linger for another moment before finally stepping beside Ethan. Her voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "for the past 6 months, each of you has unknowingly participated in the most important leadership evaluation this company has ever conducted. Many of you believed you were being measured by your financial performance, your quarterly results, and your executive presentations. Those achievements matter, but they were never the true purpose of this experiment." She turned toward Ethan with unmistakable pride before addressing the room once again. "Allow me to introduce the man many of you believed was simply a security guard standing in our lobby every morning. This is my son, Ethan Carter, and today I am proud to announce that he is the future Chief Executive Officer of Carter Global Holdings." The announcement settled over the room with extraordinary force. Faces that had entered the meeting filled with confidence now reflected shock, regret, disbelief, and quiet self-examination. Some executives lowered their eyes as they replayed months of ordinary interactions they had never expected to matter. Others glanced toward Ethan, wondering how much he had truly seen and heard while standing quietly at the front entrance. Vanessa Collins remained completely still, understanding that the greatest mistake of her career had never been underestimating a security guard. It had been underestimating the value of treating every human being with dignity, regardless of the position they held. And although she feared what might happen next, she had no way of knowing that Ethan Carter's first decision as the future leader of Carter Global Holdings would surprise everyone in that room. For several long seconds, no one in the boardroom spoke. The silence felt almost unbearable as every executive waited for Ethan Carter to respond. Many expected anger. Others expected immediate dismissals. A few quietly wondered whether this meeting had been carefully arranged to expose every person who had underestimated the young security guard standing at the front entrance for 6 months. Vanessa Collins lowered her eyes, already preparing herself for whatever consequences were about to follow. She had replayed countless moments in her mind within the last few minutes, each one reminding her how easily she had judged someone based on a uniform instead of character. Across the room, other executives shared the same uneasy feeling. They believed Ethan had every reason to seek revenge. After everything he had endured, no one would have questioned his decision if he had chosen to remove those who had treated him unfairly. But Ethan remained completely calm. The same quiet smile he had worn while opening doors every morning returned to his face, and when he finally spoke, his first words surprised everyone in the room. "I know what many of you are thinking," Ethan began, his voice steady and composed. "You believe this experiment was designed to identify the people who failed. You believe today is about exposing mistakes, embarrassing individuals, or proving that some employees deserve punishment. If that's what you expected, then you've misunderstood why my mother asked me to wear that security uniform." He slowly looked around the room, making eye contact with executives, managers, and board members alike. "For 6 months, I wasn't standing in the lobby searching for people to humiliate. I wasn't keeping score of insults or waiting for the opportunity to settle old scores. I was learning. I was discovering what kind of culture truly existed inside Carter Global Holdings when nobody believed leadership was paying attention. Every conversation, every greeting, every careless remark, every act of patience, and every unexpected kindness taught me something far more valuable than any financial statement ever could. This experiment was never about exposing bad employees. It was about discovering the people who quietly protected the values this company was built upon. The room remained silent as Ethan continued. Some of the most remarkable people in this company don't occupy the largest offices or hold the highest titles. They are the people who choose integrity when no one is watching. They help others without expecting recognition. They speak respectfully to everyone, whether they're talking to the chief executive officer or someone standing at the front entrance wearing a security uniform. Those people protect this company's future every single day, often without realizing it. He paused briefly before turning toward one side of the room. There is one employee who demonstrated that kind of leadership from the very beginning. She greeted me by name when most people walked past without looking. She treated every member of this company with equal respect. She shared her lunch with someone she believed was simply a security guard because she noticed he hadn't eaten. She defended colleagues without expecting praise. And even when false rumors began affecting her own career, she refused to respond with bitterness. Ethan smiled warmly. Naomi Parker, would you please stand? The room slowly turned toward Naomi Parker, who looked completely overwhelmed by the unexpected attention. She hesitated before rising from her seat, her hands trembling slightly as dozens of eyes focused on her. Margaret Carter smiled proudly while Michael Reynolds nodded in quiet approval. Ethan continued speaking. Leadership isn't measured by how many people work beneath you. It's measured by how many people feel valued because you were present. Naomi, during these 6 months, you demonstrated the kind of character this company cannot afford to overlook. You earned trust without demanding it, showed compassion without seeking recognition, and remained faithful to your principles even when doing so made your own career more difficult. Margaret stepped forward before making an announcement that surprised nearly everyone in the room. Effective immediately, Naomi Parker is promoted to Vice President of Employee Development and Organizational Culture. Beginning today, she will help shape the future of Carter Global Holdings by ensuring that every employee, regardless of position, experiences the same respect and opportunity that built this company from the very beginning. The room erupted into genuine applause, louder and more heartfelt than any recognition offered earlier that morning. Naomi stood speechless, tears filling her eyes as she realized that the kindness she had considered ordinary had quietly changed the course of her life. As the applause gradually faded, Ethan's attention shifted toward Vanessa Collins. The room grew quiet once again. Vanessa slowly stood, accepting that this was the moment she had feared since Ethan entered the boardroom. She expected to hear the words that would end her career. Instead, Ethan spoke with remarkable composure. Vanessa, over the past 6 months, you showed me how easily success can become disconnected from humility. Some of your decisions created division, discouraged talented employees, and allowed ambition to overshadow respect. Those actions caused real harm, and they cannot simply be ignored. Vanessa nodded quietly, unable to disagree. Ethan continued, but leadership also believes people are capable of growth when they are willing to accept responsibility. You're not being dismissed today. Instead, you will step away from your executive responsibilities and begin working directly with every department in this company over the next year. You'll meet the employees whose work often goes unnoticed. You'll listen before giving instructions. You'll earn back trust through actions rather than authority. At the end of that process, your future here will be determined not by your title, but by the person you've become. Vanessa felt an overwhelming mixture of relief, gratitude, and humility. For the first time in many years, she understood that accountability could become an opportunity instead of merely a punishment. Margaret Carter stepped beside Ethan one final time, looking around the room that had witnessed one of the most extraordinary meetings in the history of Carter Global Holdings. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter, she said with calm conviction. For too long, many organizations have measured leadership by titles, corner offices, salaries, and influence. Beginning today, Carter Global Holdings will be measured differently. Character will matter more than status. Integrity will matter more than ambition. Respect will matter more than hierarchy. Promotions will not simply recognize performance. They will recognize the way people lift others, protect one another, and preserve the values that define this company. Every employee, regardless of position, deserves to be treated with dignity because every person contributes to our success. As those words settled over the room, many executives realized they had witnessed far more than the announcement of a future chief executive officer. They had witnessed the rebirth of the culture Margaret Carter had spent her lifetime building. Months later, employees often spoke about that board meeting as the day Carter Global Holdings truly changed. New leadership programs were introduced. Recognition was given to employees whose quiet contributions had long been overlooked. Communication became more open, and people gradually discovered that respect was no longer something reserved for those at the top of the organizational chart. Ethan Carter eventually became chief executive officer, but those who worked alongside him rarely talked about his wealth or his position. Instead, they remembered the young security guard who greeted everyone with a smile, accepted disrespect without losing his kindness, and proved that true leadership begins long before anyone receives an impressive title. And perhaps that is the lesson every successful person eventually discovers. People rarely remember your position. They remember how you treated those who could offer you nothing in return. As Ethan Carter's story came to an end, one truth remained impossible to ignore. Wealth may open doors, titles may command attention, and success may earn admiration, but none of those things reveal a person's true character. Character is revealed in ordinary moments, when there's nothing to gain, no audience to impress, and no expectation of a reward. The 6 months Ethan spent standing quietly at the entrance of Carter Global Holdings became far more than a leadership experiment. They became a reminder that every conversation, every act of kindness, and every decision we make has the power to shape someone's life in ways we may never fully understand. The people who walked through those doors believed they were simply going to work each morning. They never imagined they were writing the story that would ultimately define their careers. Now we'd love to hear from you. If you had walked through those doors every morning, would you have treated Ethan Carter any differently before knowing who he really was? Let us know in the comments. Your thoughts and experiences make these conversations even more meaningful, and we always enjoy reading what you have to say. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable story. And if you think this story was unforgettable, wait until you hear what happened when a millionaire disguised himself as a homeless veteran. That story changes everything. We'll see you in the next video.